Hey guys, Brox here. Super quick introduction to this video. This is a reaction to the Diablo 4's recent campfire chat on itemization changes coming in Season 4. As a disclaimer that I always put in my videos, you can watch this video in 1.5 or 1.75 speed. You should not lose clarity in doing so. It'll help cut down the watch time. But this is a full react to the campfire with some edits to save some time. But I also just want to point out, this is a critical video. This is not a video if you are a diehard Diablo 4 fan. It's the only game you've ever played, and you can't take criticism about Diablo 4 because it would make you upset. I would tune out of this video. It's not for you. This is a critical video about the continued kind of development of the game and the perspectives that I think they could be doing better. There are things in here that I think are D4 wins. There's things in here that I think are D4 mid, and there are things in here that are definitely D4 bad. So if you subscribe to any of those angles, looking at the wins of what's coming, looking at the middle ground of what is coming, and then looking at what is bad, because there is definitely some seriously bad things that were discussed in this campfire chat that need to change, then this is that video. So I just wanted to preface this. If you can't take criticism of Diablo 4, this is not the video for you. Please tune out because it will just make you angry. But if you guys want to hear the critique and where I think that things could be better, this is going to be a full reaction to the campfire chat. So I'm just going to start. I'm actually going to jump ahead in the video. The live stream, there's like 40 minutes of fluff, and then there's some introductions. There was a really weird 10 to minute kind of intro about explaining what an ARPG is, and I don't quite understand what the point of that was. The conclusion was Diablo is a Diablo-like ARPG. It was very, very strange. Leave it to Diablo to do strange things. They're going to do a public test realm. The public test realm is going to happen on April 2nd. They're delaying Season 4, go figure. And they're extending Season 3 into May. So the public test realm will be up, it sounds like, for a couple weeks through April as they test and get feedback. And I think it's either May 14th or May 16th. I'll try to catch it in the video that they're going to have Season 4 launch. The PTR is going to be what you expect. You're just going to have a max level character, and you're going to be able to test the game out, test the end game stuff that they want to test out. There's not a lot of changes to the early game this time around that they're talking about, so they really want everybody to be level 100, max everything, and kind of push the end game content. I don't know why this says skills and community feedback. There was really nothing to do with that. They just want feedback. There's going to be a PTR forum that they're going to put up during the PTR. At the beginning of the itemization, they just said an agenda and an outline. There wasn't really anything valuable here. It was when Adam Jackson showed up that they started getting into the meat and the potatoes. So that's where I'm going to pick up in this campfire chat. I'm only going to watch it up to the Q&A section, and kind of give my point of view on some things that I think Diablo 4 still needs stuff. A lot of people are really hyped about this change, and there's a lot of good. They're making strides to do better, but as Adam Jackson pointed out along the way somewhere in here near the end of this campfire chat, they don't know if they went far enough. And if you watched my Gauntlet video on YouTube, you'll know that I don't think this team ever goes far enough with the systems that they already have. So they have these systems and they just don't use them. And now they have this new Codex of Power system, and I think they're just too afraid to really dive into it and take it to its maximum potential, which is really bizarre because what they're stealing the Codex of Power from is already a great outline of the depth that you could have with that system, which is Division 2 system. So I know a lot of people who play Diablo, especially if Diablo 4 is one of your first games, and that's how you got introduced to gaming. You may not know that Division 2 has a system that is exactly like what the Codex of Power is going to be, which is a system where you can store a library of your best affixes or aspects into this, what they call it a calibration station in Division 2. But you store it into a calibration station, or in this case, the codex, and then you can return to it and you can apply at a later date the maximum of, affix that you found, so that you don't have to store that within a stash item. The difference is in Division 2, they don't do that with the aspect part of their gear. Diablo is doing it with the weirdest part of the itemization and the gearing that they're choosing to do it for, which is they're doing it with the legendary aspect portion, and they're not doing it with the affixes themselves, which is the part of the gear that has the range, right? Which has the most diversity and range, which adds longevity and depth to a system like that, where the aspect system is usually like a one and done kind of situation. Which, if you look at Division 2, or if you've ever played Division 2, you'll know this. The aspects, because they do have like an aspect-like system in Division 2, where gear has, they call them talents, but they're like special talents that work the same way. So it basically says like, your healing grenade does 50% more healing, right? If you have this this talent on your gear in Division 2, which is the same thing as a legendary aspect. But the way they apply it is they have that stored in a separate section, and you can just pull from that at any time. And it's like a flat thing. There's no ranges on the talents or the aspects in Division 2. And I think that should be applied to D4. We'll get to that in the video. I think Diablo 4 needs to move away from having aspects have ranges on them. So a lot of theirs have like damage ranges for the abilities. So like Dust Devils do anywhere from 2,000 damage to 4,000 damage, and it's a range when it should just be a flat thing. It should just be Dust Devils do 2,000 damage, and then that scales with modifiers and player power. Or Whirlwind over time will do, it'll start from 5 to 10% and it'll scale up to 50 to 70%. Just make it do 70%. Like, why do you need the scaling portion? People are going to solve the puzzle to be doing 70% the entire time anyway. So it's this weird thing where Division 2's kind of already figured this out, and Diablo 4 still is trying to figure it out. But it annoys me because if you're going to yoink or steal Division 2's system, you should already know how Division 2's system works. So if you already have the template to do it right, why are you doing it worse? That's kind of the premise that I'm going to come from in this. And when we go through this, I'm going to talk a lot about why I think they need to go further, why they need to do more. So I'm going to start this up, and I'll pause it as we go through to kind of talk through some stuff. All right, so this is immediately one of the problems that I see with this new system. And I don't think anywhere in this campfire chat they highlight on this, so it gets me concerned. If you look at the one on the right, flat damage just being a thing now, right? Like, it's just so generic that it's boring. And the problem is I don't think the Diablo team knows that you don't want items to be boring. They just don't need to be as far gone as the left side. And what I'm afraid of, and the PTR will tell all on this, is if they went too far to the right, which means that did they forsake even having the purpose of damage types in the game? So for instance, like if you look at their competitors, Path of Exile, Last Epoch, etc., you'll get things like fire damage or lightning damage or earth damage or poison damage or void damage, and so on and so forth. And Diablo 4 has damage types. So like sorcerers use fire damage, they use lightning damage, druids use earth damage, poison damage on druids. you know, necromancers are a little bit more finicky because they can use physical. And I don't know if they went so far to the right that they just got rid of specific damage oriented types. And if they did, they messed up because you now have the problem of everyone just has the same gear, right? So it's like, okay, what's on your pants? Well, my pants are damage, vuln, and crit. Well, guess what that is. For those who have been playing Diablo for too long, that's Diablo 3, right? Crit attack speed. Well, what's your gloves? Crit attack speed. Okay, well, what's your gloves? Oh, it's crit attack speed. Oh, okay. So every class is going to be main stat damage vuln, main stat damage crit, main stat damage reduction CDR. You know, we're regressing, and there's a lot of that in this video, by the way, where we regress into Diablo 3. But we're regressing. We're going backwards. So my fear is that they've gone too far. And now we're just back to what we've always been, which is just Diablo 3 levels of everybody has the same gear, no matter what character you're playing, no matter what build you're playing, you're all hunting the same items with the same stats on them. And looking here at the right side, that's what this says, right? So I need to see, or at least get feedback, that there's still damage types that you can still, and the big part is, and the big factor here is damage types should have a much wider range than pure damage. And they know this because they were already doing this with the overly complex left side. Is the more complex generally and rare the damage type was, the higher the range of that was versus like a flat damage. So in the case to the right, if flat damage is 20 to 25%, then something like specific fire damage would be 25% to 30%. You would have a higher range by utilizing that more specific damage type, because now you're limiting from that 23% damage affecting every skill that you use regardless of type. And now you're hyper focused on saying, hey, just my fire skills are going to do more damage. So that's kind of a concern I have right off the bat, because we don't see any of that throughout this video, or at least I'll try to catch it the second time through, but I don't think I saw anything that related back to like fire damage and so on and so forth. The other concern is the item on the right still has 10% lucky hit chance, but if we're removing the silly lucky hit stuff from the left side, why do we still need lucky hit chance? These are the small things that I don't think should be overlooked when you're putting a presentation together.
Can you get an item now that gives you like int, dex, and strength on it?
No, in fact, because this wand just has intelligence on it, it is just the main stat for your class. So if you are a sorcerer, you're only going to find intelligence on items. If you're a bard, you're only going to find strength, and so on.
I can still find all stat, right?
Yes.
Yeah, all stat
yeah,
stuff
you still have all stat, but no more you're going to find, oh, I got intellect on my barbarian. That's just basically a completely dead stat for you.
Got it.
So this is a massive L. And a lot of people don't understand why it's a massive L, but it's a massive L. It tells us two things. It tells us, number one, the Diablo team has no idea what they're doing. And it's so concerning when you hear someone say, oh, you don't want intellect on barbarian gear. It does nothing for you. Well, that's a design limitation that they're putting on the game. That's not a decision choice that the player is making. So they're telling you, hey, we can't creatively make intelligence beneficial for barbarians, so we're just not even going to let that roll on gear. Well, the point should be that every stat has a benefit for every class or every character type. That's how you get diverse builds. So if you're going to, for instance, like intellect, right? Sure, it's the primary damage source and mana scaler for something like a sorceress, but for a barbarian, intellect could be rage generation, right? Or increased rage. You could just have more rage on your bar. So like every point in intelligence or intellect will give you 10 more rage on your max rage, right? So then you could cast your abilities more. This goes for everything, right? Like dexterity should have a benefit for barbarians to some degree. Like, it's more crit. So why strength could be more, straight damage, dexterity could affect their crit rate. Each individual attribute should always have a benefit for each class. That's how you get things like in Last Epoch, where you can have a strength int build, but you can be playing a Beastmaster who's using a two-hander and doing earthquake damage. So you can have it flip the script a little bit where all the stats have benefits for each of the individual classes. So to just say, hey, to make our game super boring, every barbarian is just going to get strength gear. And that's it. So when you're talking about the Diablo 3 effect, every barbarian's basically going to get strength, damage, vuln, CDR, or strength, flat damage, vuln, crit. And you can see how quickly this is just becoming boring, because this is all the game's going to be now. So the fact that the main guy developing this is just like, we don't see value in making all the stats beneficial for all the... This is probably the most offensive thing. For the whopping 5 classes in Diablo 4, right? We can't go out of our way and make these 5 attributes viable for 5 classes. It's just too much work. Come on, right? Like, we go back to the not going far enough. You have 5 whole classes. Just make everything work between all of them. It can't be that complicated. There's games out there that have twice as many classes and it makes it work. Or 3 times as many classes and they make it work. It's just frustrating.
All right, so let's talk about some of the other additional updates that are kind of adjacent to the main itemization updates. Legendary item drops from monsters that are level 95 or higher are always going to be at item power 925. That is the highest item power in the game. And once you're really facing the toughest monsters in the game, we want to make sure that you're constantly getting the best possible items. This really comes back to our idea of quality over quantity. Once you're at this point of the game, you don't really care about anything that isn't 925, so why are we dropping that for you, right? You're going to be kind of graduating out of caring about item power because you just know that everything I'm getting is the maximum item power.
Okay, so let's talk about that, because that's starting to get frustrating too. So the very last sentence that he said was, we just want everyone to have 925 item power, because at that point, everyone should just be having 925 item power, and you shouldn't care at that point about item power. So my question comes down to, why does item power exist? What is even the point of having this scaling number on gear if you don't have a purpose for it being there anymore? We're changing the itemization. You no longer need this arbitrary number. Instead, just do what you already explained that you're going to do, which I think comes later in the video, but have the individual world tiers drop the ranges of the individual affixes, and then as you go up in world tiers, the ranges increase in max range level. You no longer need item power at all. So if, for instance, in world tier 1, vulnerability can, let's say at 925 or max level item, Vuln can roll 10 to 40%, right? You can roll anywhere from 10 to 40% at max level. Sorry. World Tier 1, it can roll 10 to 20%. World Tier 2, it can roll 10 to 30%. And then World Tier 4, it can roll that 10 to 40%. It can roll the max level, right? That's all you need now. You don't even need item power. Item power now is just this arbitrary number that does nothing in this game. And you even pointed out in your own sentence that we don't really want you to care about item power anymore. We're just going to give you the best item power. Well, get rid of it. It has no value now. Just have the individual affixes roll within a smaller range in the lower world tiers, and make all the gear the same. And while you're at it, get rid of white and blue items. They don't need to exist. Just have all items drop as items. And then whatever you get, you just get the range of those affixes within that world tier. And then hopefully you're hunting for those range levels within the world tier that have the right affixes that you want on the gear. You don't need these systems anymore. You don't need this overcomplicated bloat that doesn't bring any value and only adds confusion and complexity to the game. So you can get rid of this. It doesn't need to be here anymore. I wanted to bring up another point in thinking on not needing item power anymore. I also don't think, and I think this is something Diablo needs to take a deeper look at, I don't think you need player levels anymore. And I could be wrong here. It's been a very, very, very long time since I've touched Diablo 2. I think I touched it maybe 15 years ago, so I could be off base here. But I don't think there was player levels back then. I think you grew in power based on gear. And I think that's all you need in an ARPG. I don't think you need this concept idea that the player needs to level, because it doesn't add any value. You just need to have gear provide whatever that scaling that they would gain from leveling, which may mean that you need to add something like health to items. And in doing so, you may get something like this item has 400 flat life, and then maybe life percentage, and then you can have that kind of scale what you need for gaining life as you gain into tier. You don't need your actual player themselves to scale based on how much experience you got or how much levels you got in the game, where it gives you like +1 strength per level and then +1 vit per level, giving you these back-end arbitrary numbers. I think you can just make the entire game based on the gear you find, and that makes itemization and gearing so much more important and impactful, because your entire player character power now comes from the gear that you find. So you don't need item power anymore, and truthfully, you don't need player levels anymore. You just need players to go out, hunt monsters, get gear, scale themselves with the gear that they find, so that gear is the all-encompassing most important thing in the game. You get rid of experience, elixirs and boosters and all this silly stuff that doesn't need to be there, and you just have the game focused around the most core aspect of an ARPG. Kill monsters, get loot, gain power. Repeat. And that's it. That's all you need to do. So I think, again, they just haven't gone far enough. Or in their case, they haven't gone 20 years back enough. Then we're going backwards to Diablo 3. We need to go another 10 years further, right? We need to go back to Diablo 2. And we really need to take a harder look at, like, hey, we don't need these systems anymore. We can just make gear be this most impactful thing. We don't need player levels. We don't need item power levels. That's all arbitrary stuff that's just no longer viable or needed.
Additionally, we've item rerolling, the enchanting system at the Occultist. We know this has been, it has like a scaling gold cost currently, and that just keeps on ramping up. If you want to keep fishing for that perfect affix, it could cost millions upon millions upon millions of gold. We put a cap on that. We don't think it's really healthy to have that actually scale infinitely. It'll still get a little high, but it's not going to go
That's
to
fine.
infinity.
It's a gold sink, and they need one. It's like the only gold sink in the game.
Taken a pass on the materials, the crafting materials, things like ore and herbs, and some of the other crafting materials in the game. And a lot of the ones, we had some variety of like common herbs. So that were found in different zones, and there was some nice flavor there, but ultimately they didn't really provide much compelling gameplay. So we've consolidated all of like the common crafting materials into just a single type, just basically common herbs. And then there are still some rare ones to find to craft the most powerful elixirs and so on. But we've simplified that system so your collection is a little bit easier and more streamlined.
Yeah, we also removed things like there's like a lot of monster parts like pale tongue and things like that are also have been removed as part of this experience. It's gonna make it a lot easier to craft elixirs in this new world.
Absolutely.
So, you don't have to scroll through that tab so long to see
Yeah.
exactly
Yeah.
what material you want to
Yeah.
craft with. Yeah.
So this is good, but also bad. First thing first, consolidation of pointless resources and materials. Yes, always a good win. Easier to craft elixirs. Yes, always a good win. Gathering them should not be a thing. I said this in beta. I said this in all the tests. I put this as feedback, and people somehow, tried to justify this as being a functional thing in a Diablo game. But if I have to ride around in the open world on my horse to pick flowers, then we've gone way away from what this game is. Diablo is about going to hell, killing demons, and getting loot. That's it. How picking flowers ended up in the game is so far baffling to me that it's beyond my comprehension. So the fact that we're still needing to gather anything is ridiculous. What it should, and to be truthfully honest, people mitigated this out of Diablo 4 by just doing Tree of Whispers and not having to go into the open world at all, which is my exact point. No one wants to go pick flowers in a Diablo game. It is silly, it is pointless, it is dumb, it should be removed. Just have all of the materials for anything drop off monsters. Just let us go kill things, and things drop as we kill things. So a monster drops some flowers or whatever, material, the tongue or the finger or whatever. Those are just rare drops. So the more you do, the more monsters you kill, the more hell tides you do, the more nightmare dungeons, the more pits. I hope we're going to get to that in a second. That you do, you just have the chance of getting these herbs from drops. And even in the pit display that they do later, they have materials drop based on the fact that you're in there doing that specific end game content. That's all you need. So the concept of the fact that they're still saying like, hey, you need to go gather these flowers, that needs to go. No one's doing that, and no one wants to do that. This is not Stardew Valley. We are very far away from that. So just get rid of this whole concept of gathering herbs and get back to the concept of killing demons in hell. That's it. It should be the core fundamental focus of the entire game.
Especially when they ultimately just fed towards that same goal. And then the final update we've got is updates to the Forgotten Souls, right? So the late game crafting material that you use for a lot of the enchanting or other crafting systems, we're making them a little bit more accessible. They'll come from Whispers of the Dead caches, and they can also rarely drop globally from any elite in the game. And this
Exactly. That's what everything should be. It's just a rare drop from monsters in the world. Do that with literally everything in the game. That's it. That's how the whole game should operate.
This is a really cool moment that you kind of have this jackpot moment. It's pretty rare when you kill elites, but there's a moment where you just get like this explosion of loot, and it spits out a ton of the Forgotten Souls or other loot or other crafting materials, and that's a really exciting moment when you encounter it in game. It's pretty rare, but you kind of hit the jackpot when that does happen.
And for Forgotten Souls, that can happen outside of Helltide, right?
Oh yeah, that can happen on literally any elite in the game.
Yep.
Also, we're looking at updating our uniques. So unique items are, these really build-defining, flashy, unique items, right? They are very powerful. Currently, they're locked behind just World Tier 3 and onward. They're really late-game items. And we thought that to really get you into the fun faster, to get your build online, we've made it so that many of our uniques in the game can now start dropping in World Tiers 1 and 2. So you can start getting them earlier on in the experience and really get your build going much quicker. And then once you do get into World Tier 3, then all of the uniques in the game have the potential to start dropping, including Uber uniques, which are typically those very late game chase items. There is a chance that monsters starting at level 55 drop these Uber uniques. It's a pretty small chance. It's very rare, but but it's one of those moments that you're going to find, if you're really lucky, you might find a Harlequin's Crest
Yeah, you
at
remember
level
that
55.
You'll remember that playthrough for sure.
Oh, you definitely will, right? And of course, they'll drop.
I was gonna say, kind of going
Yeah.
back to our goals of the itemization update in general, is that like at any time something really exciting can happen, right? That's the main impetus for doing this, is that even early on in the game, you can get the main thing that you're looking for. It's going to be very rare, not very common, but it's possible. And even some of our other updates coming that you're going to explain is kind of going along that vein, right?
Absolutely, yeah. We want you to have the chance to really have that high roll moment, a really exciting moment when you find that awesome loot.
This only works, and I think they touch on this later, and I think it does to an extent, but this only works if uniques can be crafted. If uniques cannot be crafted on, this is a terrible system that undermines the entire purpose of the itemization changes, because you basically will have to take the uniques over crafted items to make your build function. As he said, to make your build function, you need certain things. Like, for instance, a druid needing Tempest Roar, or a druid needing, what is that? The Claw Staff, to make, their build come online. If you have to have these items, and those items cannot be fully crafted on, and I mean through the entire crafting system from tempering to masterworking, then you have this situation of an item basically just circumventing the entire itemization system. So they need to be really careful that if you're going to give people unique items in World Tiers 1 and World Tiers 2, that it doesn't completely undermine them by the time they get to World Tier 4, and they basically have a full set of unique items to make their build function, and they don't need to do any other itemization systems, right? Like, they don't need to craft yellow gear, they don't need to craft ancestral gear, they don't need to do anything else, because they have all these other items that are, making their build function, and removing that for crafted gear would basically disable the build. So having build defining items is, in my opinion, not good for the new itemization changes that they're making. Build definition should solely come from the skill tree in the Paragon board, but I have my gripes with the Paragon board. We'll get to that in a little bit. It should come from other sources, or like the aspects of adding an aspect to a rare piece of gear that you crafted. That would be more impactful than finding an item that makes your build work, because that's more in truth, that's more of a chore for the player than it is a benefit for the player, because I literally get to sit there for however many levels and go, my build doesn't work, my build doesn't work, my build doesn't work. And my experience as the player, by level 40, and I haven't gotten this thing that makes my build work, but then another player got it at level 20, and he's, cruising to have the best time of his life because his build works, but I'm 40 levels in, and I've been struggling because I can't get this unique item that makes my build work. Well, now you have two different people having two different experiences, when everybody should be having roughly the same experience, which is find gear that matters, that increases my player power, and then have me have the ability to craft and mold that piece of gear into the build that I want it to work for. So, I want to scale poison damage through the applications of using like Vine Creeper and Wolves and Rabies and all this other things from the skill tree, and I want my gear to empower that playstyle that I craft to make work or make that more functional. So like my crafted gear will have something like 50% more poison damage, more intellect, or for a damage multiplier, and then something for like applying vuln, and then you can put that in. But I'm not trying to hunt an item that says my Vine Creeper draws enemies in and applies poison damage, right, as like a hypothetical, because then I'm hunting for that item just to make the rest of the items matter, where that should never be the case. The item should always matter, and the build should be defined in the skill tree, and we're just trying to make everything kind of function through items, or make it a better functioning build through items, and the items themselves should just be empowerments for the skill tree and the build that we want to run. So This is not a win for me. This is concerning because it just basically means that potential uniques can overwrite the entire purpose of all this itemization changes in the late game. And it can cause players to have two different experiences throughout the leveling process, which is also not what you want.
That covers the additional updates. We've got to talk about the Codex of Power. Right, so the Codex of Power is a system that has been in the game since launch, and we're making a big update here where now all legendary aspects in the game will start appearing in the Codex of Power. Every single one. Previously it was just a small subset, and I believe we even have some in-game footage that we can talk and go through an example of what this looks like.
Yeah, we'll jump over to it. We have behind the scenes, we actually have Ruben, aka Bloodshed, former content creator, now part of the Blizzard team here on Diablo. He's actually driving us through our build here, but he will be driving through all our little demos that we have today. So
yeah, awesome. Yeah, so you can see in our inventory right now, we've got Edgemaster's Siege Bow. And this has a little icon on it in the upper right in your inventory there. And that indicates that if you salvage this legendary, it will upgrade an aspect in the Codex of Power when you salvage it.
That's right. So you no longer need to go to the occultist to extract aspects in any way, because aspect crystals are no longer a thing in this new version of the Codex of Power.
Yeah, aspect crystals are gone. It's just when you salvage the legendary, it will upgrade it. So we salvage it, we can see that Edgemaster's aspect has been upgraded in the Codex of Power. So we go to our Codex of Power, and let's go take a look. So we've got Edgemaster's Aspect here, that skills deal up to 6% increased damage based on your available resource when cast. So that is the kind of legendary rank of the one that we just salvaged. Now this says 6% here. In-game it was 12% because it was on a two-handed bow, and that doubles the range. But you can see it's not a minimum roll. Right now on live Diablo IV, it's always just a minimum roll, and so once you find something better, a better aspect crystal, the Codex is kind of irrelevant. Now the Codex will continue being relevant because every time you find a higher roll of it, it's going to upgrade your Codex, and you can continually re-imprint this legendary power onto any gear that you find going forward.
That's right. So if Ruben finds a 10% roll, on something else, then that is now he can go ahead and salvage that item down. That 10% version is now going to replace the 6% version he has right now, and that's the new version that you have. So when we're talking about upgrading, what we really mean is as you find the better versions of these aspects, they replace the older ones. Now, every time you decide you want to imprint the Codex of Power, that's going to be the version that you get from that point forward.
So if you find a max roll the first time, are you just super lucky? You have it forever?
You are super lucky, and you would have that forever. Yes, you can continually imprint it. However, the ranks of legendaries, you won't be able to find a max roll of these legendaries in World Tiers 1 and 2 when you're just starting out your journey. We have extended the range, so a lot of legendaries used to say, hypothetically, if a legendary rolled between 20% and 30%, now we've extended that range from 20 to 35%. But those 30 to 35%, the highest range, the most powerful versions, those are only going to be accessible in World Tier 4. In the later games.
This
So this does give you a bit more of progression. So you can find it early and you can upgrade it, but then you're going to find even better versions as you progress through the world tiers.
And if we actually, can we go back to the build really quickly? Because, Ruben, if you can
bring
pull
up
up
that
the Codex of Power really quickly.
Show the UI a little bit here.
Yeah. Because one big thing is I know we glazed over this really quickly, but there are filters, ways of searching through everything, which is really nice. And then, of course, on the icons as well, I think people are probably seeing these numbers associated. I know it's something that is changed, obviously, with this new Codex of Power, where it's showcasing hey, there's a gold-written version of Aspect of Quickening Fog right there, which is already showcasing, hey, you have it completely maxed at 16 out of 16. And of course, there's different ranks as you're kind of leveling up throughout the Codex Power and finding different aspects of it.
Yeah, I really love that gold border to really indicate that, hey, you found the best version, you've kind of completed this. And some of them, you kind of cheat on it, right? Things that only have one rank. As soon as you unlock it, you get the best version.
Yeah, that's an example of one that you could max out in World Tier.
So let's dive deeper into this. So this is Division 2 system, straight up ripped from Division 2, and that is a win. That's a massive win. A lot of people may not know this, but Division 2 has one of the best, if not the best by far, itemization systems in any RPG, and it's really not even close. So they have something called a recalibration station. I think they renamed it to the tinkering station now, but it sounds ridiculous. I just call it the recalibration station because I'm an older Division 2 player. But the recal station basically functions exactly like this, where when you find items in the game, the items have ranges on all of the roles that they can have. So like your implicits have a range, your prefixes have a range, and then your kind of gem slot attributes have a range. And then they all have the ability to have a talent, or in this case, as Diablo IV calls it, an aspect. And in the recalibration station, you can store the best version of all of that, not just the talent, all of it. So you can store the best version of an implicit, you can store the best version of a prefix, you can store the best version of a attribute that you can add to the item. And then they have expertise, which is a scaling factor to give you more just damage the more you use a weapon. But this specific screen here, I want to point out the notation that he talks about with the aspects of cyclonic force, which is a 1 of 1. This is how all aspects in Diablo 4 should be. They should all be singular, and they should all be flat with their damage percentages or the effect that they apply. There should be no 1 of 16 on aspects, because it's the same way that it works in Division 2, where talents are flat benefits. So in the case of looking at the cyclonic force, Cyclone also provides physical damage reduction to you and your allies. That is a flat effect. It is just a bonus that you can add to your build that makes your build do something transformative. If you look at the one above it, where it's explosions from the victimized key passive heal you for 76 life for each enemy damaged. In this case, it has a range, so it's anywhere from 76 to 113, depending on, if you have the 1 in there or if you have the full 16 in there. All that should actually say is explosions from victimized key passive heal you for 10% life for each enemy damaged, or something to that effect, like a flat percentage number, not a range. Same thing for the one above it. Your imbuement skill effects have 25% increased potency against vulnerable enemies, and it's a range from 25 to 40%. Just make it 40%. It should just be your imbuement skill effects have 40% increased potency against vulnerable enemies. Get rid of the range, make it a 101. Then you go hunt these individual aspects and you feed them into your codex, and your goal is to get all of them, right? So if there's 127 unique aspects in the game, your goal is to go collect 127 to fill out your codex of power. The other benefit of that is you may find a codex, if they did itemization correctly, you may find a codex on your wizard that makes you want to go play a druid, right? So if you find like a really cool rabies wolves aspect on your sorceress and you feed it into your codex of power, and your codex of power is account bound, that means you can go roll a druid where you're like, dude, I'm really excited. I got the rabies wolf aspect, and I can just immediately go apply that on a new character and start having fun from level 1. Right? So as soon as I can apply that aspect, or level 25, whenever they put the limitation that you can apply aspects to gear, as soon as you can do that, you can start having fun with your build. Having ranges on aspects is silly. The way Division 2 handles this is your prefixes, your suffixes, your implicits have a range, which is the same way that itemization in Diablo 4 works. Your 23% damage could be anywhere from 23% to 40%, right? Or your vulnerability damage, right? It could be 20% to 40%. Or your strength roll could be anywhere from 10, plus 10 strength to plus 25 strength. Those are what you put in the codex within ranges. And then what that does is it elongates the itemization window of time to get what is referred to in Division 2 as God rolls or God roll stats. Because what you have to do is you have to, one, go find gear that has the God roll on it, but then you have to sacrifice that gear for your codex. So you have to make a decision, and it's a impactful gameplay decision of, do I want to craft on this piece of gear because it has a God roll on it, or do I want to feed it into my codex because it has a God roll on it and sacrifice it to the codex, right, for the rest of my account. And then the other cool part is you can only sacrifice one affix or prefix or implicit in Division 2 at a time. You cannot take the full gear piece. So let's say you get a piece of gear that has a max roll implicit and a max roll prefix and then a mid roll prefix. And then like two mid roll prefixes, right? So you have a max roll implicit, a max roll prefix, and then two mid roll prefixes on a piece of Diablo IV gear. You would not be able to take that to the salvager, salvage it, and get the two max rolls in your codex. Instead, what Division 2 does is it says pick one. So you can either max out your implicit, but you lose the prefix, or you can max out your prefix, but you lose your implicit in doing so, which means that you have to go find another piece of gear that has the max roll implicit on it to sacrifice it to the codex. Or you may get a situation in Division 2 where you have God roll implicit, God roll prefix, really low, third prefix, right? So something that's at like 10%. And then you have to sit there and be like, okay, well, I could sacrifice this to get, the 23% or the 40% damage into my codex, and then I could apply that 40% damage upgrade to my current piece of gear. So let's say it's a chest piece, right? I can sacrifice the 40% in my chest piece, then I could craft that upgrade onto my current chest piece and make that more impactful. But I'm sacrificing a piece of gear that's so God rolled that I could actually optimize or roll at the enchanter person in Diablo 4 that allows you to reroll stats. I could try to reroll that stat and then mastercraft that low stat into something higher and then have a godly piece of gear, but it may not be a piece of gear that it benefits me right now, right? It may be a piece of gear that would benefit a different class or a different build, but you don't have that in this system. In this system, you just have aspects which should be flat, but you're not really affecting the core implicit and prefixes and suffixes of the items in the game, which is where you get the longevity out of itemization. And this is why I think the Diablo 4 team, if you're going to steal Division 2's system, go play Division 2 and learn why that system is so good and why it has so much depth and why its optimization system in Division 2 is so far ahead of even things like Path of Exile. It's, in my mind, it's not even close, because you can do so much kind of manipulating and control, but you also still have this tug and pull of like, what do I do with this item? Do I sacrifice it? Do I not sacrifice it? And it can take hundreds, if not thousands of hours to fill out the Division 2's Codex of Power or recalibration station, because each of those prefixes implicits apply to specific pieces of gear. So like your chest piece doesn't roll the same stats as your gloves do. Your gloves roll completely different stats. Your chest pieces roll completely different stats. So when you're looking to God roll into your calibration station or into your Codex of Power specific upgrades, they have to come from that specific piece of gear, which also allows you to do targeted farming, which Division 2 has. You can target farm because you may be like, okay, I need to go get my damage god rolls, and I need to find a piece of gear that has 40% damage. So I'm going to go target farm chest pieces in this specific end game system so that I can try to get that 40%. And that may take you days. It may take you weeks. Potentially, it may even take you months, because you're trying to find that really rare, that 1% drop that you can feed in. And then there's the chance that you get it, but it's on such a good piece of gear that you can't afford to sacrifice it to the calibration station or to the codex. And again, you have to make a meaningful choice that says, okay, I'm going to put this one in the stash and I'm going to go grind some more. I'm going to go kill some more monsters until I find this piece of gear that I do feel comfortable with sacrificing to the Codex of Power. And that adds gameplay longevity. So you have this system where they're ripping off a system from Division 2, but they're not fundamentally understanding Division 2's system and why it's so good at what it does. So I just think, like, guys, you have developed the what's the word I'm looking for? You've developed the template for the Division 2 system. Now go do it correctly. Like, go add in the right things into this platform and do it correctly, and you will have one of the best ARPGs easily on the market, because Division 2 is the only system that I'm aware of that operates the way they do. And it's incredible that it hasn't been stolen yet by other people. So they have a lot they need to kind of do with this system. This is very baseline, and I think it needs a lot of changes. It could be done so much better. So I've actually loaded up Division 2 here because I think a visual representation of what I just described is going to be a huge benefit. So we're at the tinkering station, and I want to show you exactly what I mean by not going far enough with the Codex of Power. So when we enter the tinkering station here, we have a couple different options. Our expertise, tinkering, which is optimization, and then our library, which is where we store all of our affixes and our aspects or talents as they are in the Division 2 world. So for instance, if we go into the library itself, it is broken down by each individual section. So like I said, it's not just a blanket window with everything in it. Each individual gear piece has individual requirements and individual stats. And then each individual weapon also has individual affixes that it can roll, individual talents or aspects that it can roll, and those are all stored in the library. So if we look at rifles, for instance, rifles have core implicits that it can roll: rifle damage or critical hit damage. And you'll see that it has a bar that has a range on it. Or in this case, I've already filled these out. So you're going to see a lot of mine are filled out, but I'll try to find some that aren't. And then you can also see that it has attributes. So these are your prefixes that are under the implicits that you can also fill out in your Codex of Power. So here you'll see my reload speed is not maxed out because I have not found a weapon that has 12% reload speed as its prefix. In Diablo 4, this would be its affix. So it's vulnerability damage, or its critical hit rate, or its critical hit damage, or its fire damage, or its lightning damage. That would be what you would fill in here in the Codex. That's the reason you do that, is because there's way more prefixes and affixes in the game than there are aspects for legendary powers. It elongates the gameplay grind, because if I want all of these god rolled, it's going to take me much longer to do this and find all the gear that I need to do this than it would be to just go find all the legendary aspects in the game. But then you have talents, which are the legendary aspects of Division 2. So these are the same thing as legendary aspects on gear in Diablo 4. And you'll see here that, for instance, like Breadbasket, landing shots adds a stack bonus of plus 35 headshot damage to the next headshot for 10 seconds, stacks 3 times. It is a flat effect. There's no range. It's not plus 35% to plus 55%. That's not how this works. It's a flat bonus. So here on the next one, killing an enemy grants 40% critical hit damage for 10 seconds. It is a flat effect. There is no range on these, so the talent doesn't have a range. It is this is going to do this, and you can add this to any rifle in the game. So what you do is you find a base level item or base level rifle in this situation, and you would come in and you would go to the optimization side. So if we go to our rifles, and let's use this one for instance. So you'll see here, this rifle has a god roll on its core, on both of its core implicits, but it does not have a god roll on its prefix, on its attribute. So I could come here and I can then replace that with any of the Codex of Power prefixes or affixes that I have already filled into my codex. So in this case, I obviously don't want to put it with a non-god rolled one because I have 2 god rolled implicits. I would want to replace this with something that's already god rolled and impactful. So it could be something like a god rolled damage out of cover, a god rolled damage to armor, a god rolled critical hit chance. It depends on the build that I'm going for. But then this item would, if I did that, would have all god rolled stats. Then I could come to the talent and I could recalibrate that to killer that we just looked at, right? I could then put the critical hit damage is plus 40 effect and replace fast hands on the item. And now I've crafted a god rolled 1886 rifle designed for my build, right? And this adds a ton of complexity and depth to how I want to manipulate this item, but I have full control over it. Now, if I go to, let's say, another item that doesn't have god rolls. So this one doesn't have god rolls. This one, it's missing here, it's missing here, and it's missing here. Well, I can't go in and just replace all of these. I only get one chance to re-roll. So like if I take headshot damage and I convert it to damage with armor, when I do that, it's going to lock me out from being able to do any more, right? So I cannot do these 2 now because I've already grinded or crafted on this piece of gear. But it doesn't mean that I can't get these 2 god rolled stats because Division 2 also has that factored in through what is called optimization. So if I go back, if I go back here, we can optimize these pieces of gear. However, optimizing comes with a massive cost. So if you look down here, cost to optimize, and it requires all of these items. These items, especially this item here, is extremely rare. So you only want to optimize on extremely rare pieces or core pieces to your build that you would want to make sure you get maximized out. And the optimization is very, very small. So if we so let's look at this one, for instance, right? Like on this one, I could actually use these resources and get this to god roll. So the next roll on it for the optimization would actually god roll out the rifle damage. But on critical hit damage, I would use all these resources and I would not get all the way to full. I would have to do it twice, which means that I would need to use 10 of my 25 extremely rare resources to god roll the critical hit damage. And then I would have to use another 7 to god roll the rifle damage. But I could do this and I could end up with a perfect rolled item, but it takes a lot of resources to do that, to get this item to be that good. But it is possible. You're not locked out of it. It's all to the player's decision of how much of the game do they want to play, how much of these rare resources do they want to grind out, and how do they want to spend them to, enhance their items or craft on their build. And that goes for every piece of gear section in the game. So when you come here and you look at chest pieces, it's the same thing. You can roll and optimize based on what you want to do with your build. So this is me. This is the chest piece I am wearing. I have god rolled this chest piece to have armor regen, armor, explosive resistance, all maxed out with the unbreakable talent. I have put all this on, and this is my set piece, right? So this is what you're striving for and working towards. But I don't have all of my pieces god rolled. So if we go to my gear set of what I'm wearing, sure, my chest piece is maxed out. But if you look at my helmet's not, because I don't have all the rare resources to do that. So I'm missing on the implicit, I'm missing a chunk of armor from not having grinded it out. And then I'm also missing my 2 attribute gears being maxed out. Same goes for like my memento bag. My memento bag is not fully optimized yet. I haven't rolled. And this is an exotic piece of gear. I can optimize on this piece of gear. I just haven't gotten the resources to do that for every piece of gear that I'm wearing. So it adds this huge longevity to the game. One, I need to go find all of these pieces of gear. And I also want to show you this in the tinkering station for the library. I want to say it was shotguns. I should have one in here that's upgradable. So here, if you look at this shotgun, right, I can put my rate of fire, which is the last. So actually, it's not the last. I'm missing quite a few of these, actually. But this shotgun that I have in my inventory or in my stash would max out rate of fire, right? And I could do that. I could sacrifice this item to make rate of fire up. But if I do so, I lose this item. Look at this item. It's practically God rolled. So the question comes down to, do I really want to sacrifice this near perfect shotgun that could be potentially used for another build just to get this last little bit of rate of fire? Or do I want to go find another shotgun that has max rate of fire but isn't perfectly God rolled? And the decision I've made is I'm keeping this shotgun. It's way too good. It's already, 0.1% off of perfect. I'm not going to sacrifice that just to have a max rate of fire in my codex. I'm going to go find another shotgun. So that requires me to go play more of the game if I want to optimize and fill out this piece of gear. And I think I can look at that for my SMGs as well. So if we go to SMGs and we look at optimal range, right? So I have another situation where I could improve my optimal range, but look at this SMG. It has almost perfect SMG damage, almost perfect critical hit chance, and I could swap out optimal range for like critical hit damage rather than critical hit chance, or I could put more critical hit chance on there if I needed it. I could swap out close and personal, and then I could start grinding and optimizing on this weapon. So no, I'm not going to sacrifice this weapon either just to get a little bit more on my optimal range. I'm going to go find another piece of, another SMG that has perfect optimal range and not sacrifice this SMG. So it comes down to like making these tough decisions. So another one, like here, another example, I could maximize swap speed, but I have a God rolled SMG here. So I'm not going to do that, right? So this system makes you have this huge codex of things to fill out and strive for and get gear for. And it takes hundreds, if not thousands of hours to get all of this to a 100%. I've been playing well into the hundreds of hours, and I still have tons of missing pieces. I have missing talents that I still haven't gotten on some of these. Like, there's 6 missing talents here, there's 3 missing talents here. And the game tells me very clearly that there's more that I should be out there grinding for. But on some of these, I do have it all perfect. I have all 22 backpacks. I have all of my values maxed out. I have all my implicits maxed out. So on any backpack I get, I can pretty much God roll that backpack fairly easily with some optimization of the gear pieces. This one's kind of interesting. So this chest piece, I'm missing the last percentage on the last one that I have, but I could do it if I wanted to. But both of these are incredibly good chest pieces, so I'm not going to do it. So it's that choice of, again, I'm one off from having this perfect, but I don't have the chess piece that I want to sacrifice to do it because these are both extremely good chess pieces. So this is the Division 2 system. This is what I mean by them not going far enough. They need to make talents not have ranges, just be flat benefits. And then they need to put the entire affix system into the Codex of Power and then have that be your goal to strive. So like for Diablo 4's sake, something like damage to armor would be vulnerability damage, and you'd have your 10% at the bottom and your 40% at the top, and you're trying to find an item good enough that has 40% vuln at the end game that you feel comfortable sacrificing to the codex so that you can maximize this out. Imagine doing that for every affix in Diablo 4 and how long that would take. That is what this system should be. and have underbaked it. And the sad part is this system already exists, and it exists in almost a near perfect state in Division 2. All they have to do is literally come in here, play for, maybe 100 hours to figure out exactly how this full system works, and then just absorb it into Diablo 4. The platform is already there. They've developed the template. They just need to understand why the depth of Division 2 system is so good.
So you might be asking, well, how do we temper? We've got tempering manuals. So these are items, manuals that are going to drop from most content in the game. This isn't something you need to go target farm. You're just going to find these as you're playing. And these manuals are going to be a list of possible affixes that are kind of themed to individual builds. So if you are a bone necro, for instance, the manual for bone necro might have things specifically to bone spear and bone splinters and bone spirit. When you do the tempering, which is done at the blacksmith, it will attach a random one of the affixes from that manual onto the item that you're tempering. And if you don't get the exact one that you want, or you don't get the roll that you want, you can re-roll these affixes up to the item's tempering durability. Now, this is a lot without an example, so I think we've got an example where we can just
like show
walk
people
through,
what it looks
right?
like.
Yeah, so here's some screenshot examples of the actual recipes that appear. So on the left, we've got the Manual of Natural Motion. This is a generic recipe that really applies to any class. It's got a variety of movement speed options on it. So you've got, you might just attach movement speed to your gear. Maybe you get a higher value of movement speed, but only after you kill an elite. We have the option to reduce your evade cooldown or give you mobility skill cooldown reduction. We've tagged a lot of skills in the game with mobility tag when, things like teleport or charge. And then on...
Okay, so this is interesting, and I'm going to make a bold statement based on what you see on the screen right now. I think if you introduce this into the game, you can 100%, no questions asked, get rid of the Paragon boards. You don't need them. The Paragon boards are overly complex. Casual players don't understand them. Honestly, even some of the best players I've ever, that play ARPGs don't maximize the efficiency of Paragon boards. One, because it's tedious, it's inefficient, it's boring, it's overly complex, and it's not meaningful gameplay, right? The only thing you're going to the Paragon boards for is the legendary nodes, or whatever the build altering or defining thing, or glyphs, right? Because you need the glyphs to make a certain part of your build function, such as like the exploit glyph, right? So that you can get vuln, where your build may not have a means to get vuln. So you have this situation now where you can customize your items to basically take the legendary nodes from the Paragon board and just slam it into your item at a chance, right? You have a foraging potential. You get 5 chances, you have a manual, you have the legendary node that was once on the Paragon board within the manual, and you get 5 chances to slam that onto your piece of gear at a good percentage rate, right? Like at one of the, 14 to 19.5% ranges that are on there. You don't need the Paragon anymore. And in my opinion, get rid of it. The Paragon board is unfortunately for the audience that Diablo 4 swings to currently, is a non-meaningful, overly complex, and extremely boring part of the game. You could also, because the system already exists, we've seen it in prior seasons, you could bring back the vampire power system, not the function of the actual vampire powers, but the system itself, where you could inlay glyphs onto your character sheet without going into the Paragon board, and you could take the Paragon glyphs and just move it to that system. So you could put the glyph system from the vampire powers, bring it back, make it a tab on your character page, but in there are the former glyphs from the Paragon board, and you can choose to add them to your character, and then you can choose to level them up through Nightmare Dungeons so that it still functions the same way. You just don't need Paragon boards anymore. Personally, I would make this change immediately. I would dump Paragon boards from the game, and I would use this new manual tempering system to apply what the Paragon boards were functionally there to apply, which is build defining legendary nodes. And you now have a chance and a range that would affect the item being good or not. And then move the glyph system to the old vampire power system on your character sheet. There's no reason to have Paragon boards now. And I think they make the game worse. So they don't really touch on this, and I'm not entirely sure how this system works. It's going to definitely be a PTR testing ground thing. But when you read the manual, is it permanent, or does each role eat one manual? So, for instance, if you're at Last Epoch recently, this essentially is a chaos glyph, right? But every time you use a chaos glyph and you use forging potential, you use the actual chaos glyph. It's gone. So, do you need 100 manuals to do 100 reforges? Or do you just get one manual when you find it, you eat it, and then it's permanently in this system, and you can just choose to re-roll that manual as many times as you humanly possibly want? So do you only have to find the manuals once, I guess is a question? Or do you have to continuously find the manual again once you use it once? Because then you may need to stack up on manuals before you can re-roll an item. The other thing I don't understand from this system is if I want to re-roll one of the tempered, I guess, slots, do I get to choose which tempered slot, or am I stuck once I choose like offensive? So for instance, if let's say I temper in an offensive and a defensive, but I still have 3, we'll call it temper chances left, right? Durability rerolls or temper rerolls left. I still have 3. Can I choose to temper mobility in place of the defensive? How much control do I have, right? Like, how does that system work where I say, okay, I want to put my mobility in place of my defensive because I no longer need defensives. I got that on another piece of gear. I got a really strong defensive piece of gear, and now I want to improve my mobility on this piece of gear that formerly had a defensive stat on it. How much flexibility do I have? Or if I choose an offensive and a defensive, am I stuck only re-rolling the offensive and the defensive pieces on that piece of gear, right? Like, am I stuck within that manual set for the rerolls? And if it's the latter option, they need to change that because it's too restrictive. So I wonder if they're going to have a generic manual that you can get as well. It also appears that once you eat the manual, it's permanent. I don't know if I like that. Part of me is like okay with it because it's more casual. But part of me is like, okay, so you found that one manual. How many manuals are there? Is there only 20 manuals for each class? Like per box, right? So, you know, how many manuals are you going to try to hunt per season? Or should it act like Last Epoch where if it's a glyph, you consume it for the roll? So like this marksman finesse manual, I would get one shot at hitting one of these, and then I'd have to go find another marksman finesse manual to re-roll it. Is that too much? Or is that just fine? Right? Like, I guess it's a question for the player base. I kind of lean on, if we're going to need to do the new pit, which is, from my understanding, where these manuals drop, then the pit should be supplying these at a fairly robust rate, that maybe it should be something that is consumed per use to go make you do more of the pit endgame, right? It gives you a driving force to go back into the pit versus, okay, I got all the manuals from the pit. I really don't have another reason to go back to the pit. You know, after I have this, besides maybe the crafting material for masterworking, right? There's no real drive. So potentially single use would be better than just permanently having it because it's a consumable based system. Whereas something like the aspect system, where it's like, hey man, I don't want to hold on to these 50 max rolled aspects. Can I just put them somewhere? Because I'm just going to eat them and apply them to the next piece of gear, but I don't even get 50 pieces of gear per season to apply 50 of these to. I just don't want to get rid of any, max rolled aspects. Whereas this system is more of a chance system and could be used as a consumable system. So part of me thinks that maybe this should be consumable, just to have a driving force to continue to do the pit for 3 months straight and not just do the pit for the first week.
Do, say, marksman skills to put on there. We can do marksman finish.
And this was a horrible example because you can't find out the truth about the rerolls, right? Because you only have the offensive and the defensive option. I want to see a piece of gear that has offensive, defensive, utility, mobility, all within its option pool. And how do you reroll against it? The game's also going to crash here in a second. We're not going to get to find that out either way because the game crashes. So
finesse, and this will give us either bonus marksman
PTR,
damage.
I guess will have to be a testing.
Why don't we just temper it and see what it looks like? Hey,
we can jump ahead. We saw this.
Of RNG.
Yeah.
One thing, there's a lot of changes we have going in, and there's some things that are going to be are
Okay, maximum life per hit, resource cost reduction, and marksman damage. Okay, so this is interesting, but I'm kind of looking for like earth damage or fire damage to make skills still have a purpose to have a damage type, and I don't see that here.
kind of in the middle of being.
Also, I just want to point this out. This still looks terrible. They got to do something about this UI for items. There was a post forever ago where some guy did a rework and made it look more like the old Diablo 3 system where it was really easy to read. They need to do that. Because this still looks so... One, it's so bland, but it's just a wall of text that just is the same color and runs together. It would be so much more beneficial if something in here had color. Like either the ranges had color, the number factors had color. Like this is just ugly, and it's like at a glance, I'd have to stop and read all this. This is a massive wall of text to kind of read, just to be like, oh, is this good or not? I don't like this. I've never liked this. I think they should fix it.
So you can see when this is in here, we've got tempered affixes, 1 out of 2. Because this is an ancestral item, you can temper it twice from 2 different categories. So you're going to be able to put 1 weapon and 1 offensive on there. And then there's this tempering durability remaining.
I also don't understand this concept of having to have 1 and then an alternate 1 from a different subclass. Like, who cares? If someone wants to run 2 defensives because they're making a Thorns build and they want to be really tanky, let them. Like, what? Why is this a restriction? I'm very unclear on why this is a restriction. If someone wants to be super duper fast and they want to sacrifice offensive and defensive power to run 2 mobility skills, let them. Like, why the restriction? If someone wants to go glass cannon and just dump everything into offensive and say, screw defensive, I don't care, let them. Like, why control this? Let the player control this. It's so weird.
Now, right now, you can temper legendary items.
Correct.
And rare items, but you can't temper unique items.
Correct. Unique items, kind of what you see is what you get, right? They drop still with the
Massive L. Okay, so I was wrong. I originally thought you could temper and masterwork. I think you can masterwork unique items, but not being able to craft unique items goes back to my original point about unique items. You're forcing the player to give up a slot that they can customize their own character to say, hey, you need this item for your build to function. So like Tempest Roar or the Crone Staff. That's the staff I was trying to think of earlier. It's like, hey, you don't get to craft a cool weapon. You have to use this unique, and the unique isn't allowed to be crafted. massive L. Massive L. Instead, they should treat uniques like any other rare item where you can craft to your heart's content. You just have this cool, very rare staff that's, that build defines your build, but it doesn't restrict you from having the same enjoyment from the crafting system. So I think that's a massive, I don't know. I hate that because, again, they talked about, so if you missed the first part, they talked about bringing uniques in earlier so that you can get uniques in World Tier 1, World Tier 2, and so on. And the problem it presents is if I get a bunch of unique items, by the time I get to World Tier 4, I don't need to interact with any of these systems because the unique items are going to be more impactful and build defining for me than crafting and using these new cool systems. So they should not be limiting the systems that they are spending so much time creating from the unique items that people are going to need to make their builds work. I think this is a huge, huge mistake.
Is you want to make it a little bit easier for you to go find some of those really good baseline template items for you to start building on top of, as opposed to having it be like, I need to find like 70 helmets in the hopes I find a max roll cooldown reduction on it, right? Like we're in a different place now in terms of how we're thinking about that. In addition to the crafting, the trading changes that we've made as well. Want to make it a little bit easier for you to find some of these things between it being a lot easier to have drops that are relevant for you appear when you're doing various types of content, but also that if you're playing with friends, there's opportunities for you to maybe trade some things around at the same time.
You mean like a loot filter?
Yeah, I think you make a really good point about finding really strong base items to build off of. And I think that goes great into our next point where we talk about greater affixes. So greater affixes are affixes that appear in the late game. They are more powerful versions of the normal affixes. So they come at a 1.5x multiplier on the affixes max roll. So let's say a hypothetical affix might come between like 50 to 100 of a stat. If it rolls greater, then you actually get 150 of that stat instead. Instead of the roll, it always comes in at max. So it comes in at that 150 mark. These are really exciting drops when you get into the late game. They're going to be immediately obvious whenever they drop on the ground. They're going to have a little change to the UI, so you can see it right away and you know, hey, that one has greater affixes on it. And that's going to be ones that you're really going to want to pick up and make sure that you take a look at, and then you really want to build off of because they're some of the strongest affixes in the game. I think we've got an example here. And one other note, these, as I mentioned, they're late game. They only appear on Ancestral Legendary items and Ancestral Uniques that are dropping in World Tier 4. I think we can zoom in on the top one here, where we can see we've got a little like some Roman numerals at the end of it too. That indicates that this pair of gloves has
UX
two
person
greater
at
affixes on
Blizzard
it. And when you actually
really
go pick
needs
it up,
help.
we can take a look at the tooltip of the item itself. And we can see that intelligence
slapped
here
a
is
Roman
highlighted,
numeral
and so is critical strike damage.
to be like,
these are
hey, this is a special piece of gear. You should pick it up. Here's a Roman numeral. Okay, so you've probably already heard, or if you watched this earlier when it was live, or if you watched any of the YouTube videos about this, people are going to make the joke because it's more relevant right now than the past is, that this is exalted items from last epoch. And yes, but also no. What people don't understand is this existed in Diablo 3. We just called them ancient items. Ancient items were just better versions of the like normal stat rolled items. So you would get an ancient item, and the ancient item would have a higher range of the damage, the range that they could roll, right? And then in that, their ranges were, had a higher base starting point and a higher cap point. So I don't physically or mentally or I guess comprehensively understand what is happening at Blizzard where they hate their own IPs. Like, why is there this internal disdain for yourself? Because, and what I mean by that is, and we're going to get to this in a second in this video too, they're bringing back a ton of things from Diablo 3. And I mean a ton of things. But the Diablo 4 team seems so disgusted with the concept of just calling it what Diablo 3 called it. So instead of greater rifts, they're calling it pits. It sounds terrible. Just call them greater rifts. We've all been playing Diablo for 10 years. You're bringing back greater rifts. Just call it greater rifts. Right? Like, it's fine to embrace your heritage. It is fine to embrace your historical past. Well, people look at Diablo 3 and they're like, it's Diablo 3, it's whatever. Some people look at Diablo 3 as a great time. Like, it was its own thing. It understood what it was. It was its own vibe, and it had millions upon millions upon millions of players. And it was for the longest time until GTA 5, it was the most sold video game ever. So why hate your historical predecessor? So what I mean by that is they later in the Q&A session ask for feedback about, like, how do we spruce this up from a UI UX thing instead of putting 2 Roman numerals on the ground that look god awful. It's simple. Have it glow green and call it ancient. That's what it was. It's just an ancient item that has better stat ranges. So just do that. Embrace Diablo 3. Stop treating it like it's this bastard child that you don't want to, communicate with. Because in all honesty, Diablo 3 has been doing better than Diablo 4 in the last 2 seasons. By a lot. It's not even close. Season 29 and Season 30 compared to Season 1 and 3, for instance, of Diablo 4. I'm going to skip 2 because 2 was relatively okay. But Season 1 and 3 compared to 29 and 30 in Diablo 3, Diablo 3 was a better time. And it's not even close. So stop like saying like, Diablo 3 is not worth, looking at. It absolutely is. Just call these ancient ancestral items and change the color to green. We all know what that means. We all played Diablo 3 for 10 years. It's fine to do that. It's Diablo. You set the precedent for it. And hell, I'm on the threshold. Bring back primal items. Screw it. Make them super duper duper rare like they used to be. Make it like a 1 in 5,000 chance that you get a primal version that has god roll stats. Because if you, again, did the Codex of Power system correctly, you could then feed that item, feed a primal into the Codex, and, absorb a prefix that you may want for your build, or an implicit that you may want for your build. Bring back the cool stuff. Like, it's fine. So, this is an ancient item. They should call it an ancient item and just change the color to green and make the laser beam that comes up from the ground green. You don't need the Roman numerals. You don't need the weird 2 next to it. Just make all 3 of the affixes, roll at a higher range, get rid of this weird dot thing right here, get rid of these, they look silly, and just make these a different color. That's it. It's that simple.
These roll at the max roll, and I think we've got a comparison kind of between a standard version. So on the left is a non-greater version of a dagger. You've got, say, 74 dexterity, and maybe it rolled between 70 and 84. But on the right, we've got
okay, this is what I mean. We're back to Diablo 3. Dex, attack speed, crit. It's a Diablo 3 item. That's all this is. We've regressed back to Diablo 3. God, I think we're all starting to figure out Diablo 3 really wasn't that terrible outside of set items, because this is all this is a Diablo 3 item.
Greater version of dexterity, and that's going to always give you 126, which is 1.5 times the 84. Same with the critical strike damage down at the bottom. So if you find the dagger on the right, that's a really good one. I mean, not only do you have 2 greater affixes, you also max roll the attack speed.
I'll go back to Diablo 3 to find it.
That is a great base item to start building.
I know how to hunt attack speed, main stat, and crit on a Diablo 3 item. I got this. Okay, I'm going to go back to my point about them really needing to pick better items for presentations when they do these presentations. Why is this the item you wanted to highlight in this presentation? We spent the whole time talking about itemization upgrades to get away from this damage on Tuesdays situation. And you're highlighting an item that says a % chance on a % chance to generate resource when you hit a very specific enemy type. Okay, so on Tuesday at 8 in the morning, you're going to get a coffee, but only if you go to this Starbucks in West Birmingham. What is happening? We're spending the whole presentation talking about getting rid of crap like this. You decided to highlight this item. Why?
Let's focus in on like the maximum
I can't
life
believe this is the item
there.
I highlighted.
So on the left at rank 2, you see we've got
They
880
need people
bonus
in their
maximum
marketing
life.
department.
And so we take it, we masterwork it up to rank 3, and then that will upgrade that to 920 maximum life. So a little bit of an improvement. But then once we hit rank 4, we actually get a much larger increase in maximum life. It goes from 920 all the way up to 1,120. While the other affixes on the gear stay static because they didn't roll randomly because we're only hitting 1. To Joe's point earlier about we still have some in development. This is in development content. It's not final, as the watermark says. The tempered affixes at the bottom, the Golem active cooldown reduction and the Bone critical strike damage, those also would be being upgraded and are eligible to have this this larger bonus. But in this particular screenshot example, those numbers didn't change, but they will change in the final.
Okay.
And there's a chance.
That I think I missed. So let me make sure that was what I heard.
The tempered affixes at the bottom, the Golem active cooldown reduction and the Bone critical strike damage, those also would be being upgraded and are eligible to have this this larger bonus. But in this particular screenshot example, those numbers didn't change.
Okay. Everything I said before, I'm probably going to edit out of the YouTube video, and I'll probably leave this in. That's great. So they clarified. You can masterwork into tempered rolls, which means, and this is for anybody who actually is, watches this in the future, that you can mess up crafting because you can masterwork before tempering and you've bricked your chance to hit your tempered rolls. So that is huge. It adds a skill to crafting and means that you have to do it right or you can really mess up. It also means that you could end up with low tempered rolls on a high piece of gear item if you do it wrong. So there's actually a skill to this now that's very, very big. That's a big, big, big thing. And that's a W. Like, I'm not completely negative this whole video. That's actually a huge W, that there's complexity with the crafting system.
But they will change in the final, and there's a chance.
Now I do think they should make the manuals consumable. I think making the manuals consumable makes this entire system add so much gameplay longevity to the game by a huge margin. This would keep players playing the game. You could take someone who would put 10 hours into a season and they'll put 100 hours into the season.
Get affected, yeah.
Yeah, they will be included just like all of the rest of them. But yeah, so as you go through it, you're going to get kind of 3 of these effects at rank 4, 8, and 12. And they can all go on the same one. So if you get really, really lucky and you really needed a lot of maximum life, you might get just a ton of maximum life every time that increases. Or it could be on one of your tempered affixes. You could get tons of Golem cooldown reduction if that's the kind of build that you're looking for. And once you fully masterworked an item, Or,
I like how he doesn't highlight this, or you could completely brick your item and you have to go start over. Because you could need the Golem cooldown reduction and you could hit nothing but, mobility, movement speed. And then you're really fast, but you don't have a Golem that has cooldown reduction. So you could completely brick your build as well, which is great. Or brick your item. You won't brick your build. But you could brick an item with the crafting system. That's great. That's a good thing. That's a W.
It didn't really pan out the way you wanted to. The random rolls didn't quite go your way. You are able to reset it and try it again, but you will kind of lose all the materials that you've invested into it. But you can try that again. It doesn't completely lock you out of it.
Right. So once you've got like a really great pair of gloves or whatever that you've tempered at this point, you enchanted to get exactly the affix you wanted off it. Maybe you got some greater affixes on it in the first place when you started. Then you take that item into, assuming you got through all that process, you can take it into the masterworking feature, and then you can kind of keep going at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and get the opportunity to kind of hopefully crit exactly the affixes you're looking for.
Yeah, and if you do get that right, you find something that's got critical strike damage, and then you hit all 3 times on it, super upgraded. That's going to be like one of the best items in the game that probably no one else.
Wait, did they say you could reset it? Hold on. Maybe I'm now hearing that wrong. Oh, I hope you can't reset it.
So if you get really, really lucky and you really needed a lot of maximum life, you might get just a ton of maximum life every time that increases.
I'm concerned he said
or
you
it could
can
be
reset
on
it.
one of your tempered affixes. You could get tons of golem cooldown reduction if that's the kind of build that you're looking for. And once you fully masterworked an item, if it didn't really pan out the way you wanted to, the random rolls didn't quite go your way, you are able to reset it and try
Oh, that's terrible.
it again, but you will kind of lose all the materials that you've invested in.
No. Remove L. Okay, I take back what I said about a W. That's a huge L. That should be a hard brick on the item, and you have to go try again. Because that makes you go back into the game to get another item, rather than just sit there with boring gathering materials, just spamming till you get it correct on this one item. No, the game is about dude. I think your name's Charlie. Charlie, the game is about item hunting. I don't know if you know this about ARPGs, or as you guys like to call it, a Diablo-like. It's about finding items. Get rid of the reset. If you brick an item, you bricked it. Guess what you have to go do? Go kill some more monsters, find another item. Try again. No resets.
Into it, but you can
thought
try
I
that
heard
again.
that.
It doesn't
I was-
completely
that's terrible.
lock you out of it.
Right. So you enchanted. Then you take that item into, assuming you got through all that process, you can take it into the masterworking feature, and then you can kind of keep going at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and get the opportunity to kind of hopefully crit exactly the affixes
No,
you're looking for.
no.
Yeah,
See,
and
you should
if
not be able to
you
keep
do get
going
that right,
at
you
it.
find something that's got critical strike damage, and then you hit all 3 times on it, super upgraded.
See,
that's
the
going to be
problem.
like
That's the problem right there. Because all you're going to do is you're just going to keep rolling the same item over and over again till you don't need to play the game anymore. Okay, so I have this pair of gloves that has damage, vuln, crit. And I miss, reset. I miss, reset. I miss, reset. You see on my playstyle right now is I'm just sitting at the crafting dude and I'm just like miss, reset, miss, because you're gonna, here's the fun part, you're gonna know if you miss by the 8th roll. You're not gonna know if you miss by the 12th roll. You're gonna know by the 8th roll. So you only have to spend materials up to the 8th roll to see if you miss, because you'll know if you double crit or not for the roll, and then you try to see if you triple crit. But if you don't double crit, you just reset at 8. So now you're changing your gameplay from kill monsters, find cool items, to roll 8 times, reset, roll 8 times, reset, roll 8 times, reset, roll 8 times, hit it. Okay, roll to 12, miss, reset, roll to 8, see if I hit it. No, okay, roll. And I'm just sitting at a vendor until I get this lucky triple crit on the one stat I want the triple crit on, and then I don't need to play the game anymore. I no longer need to go item hunt, because I have, as he just explained, I have the god item. No. It's bad. That's really bad. And that should not be the focus of this game. If you brick an item, you bricked it. Go find another one. Okay, so I'm going to bring up another point. I'm ignoring what they're talking about right now, but I'm reading the next decision that they chose, which is this aspect. What I meant by like simplifying the aspects to just being flat, this does not need to be a paragraph. Just say the ossified key essence passive also increases critical strike damage of your bone skills by 40%. Get rid of this, whatever this is. You don't need this. Just say the ossified key essence, if you're using this legendary power, your bone skills have 40% more crit damage. You don't need this whatever this is. And then in the Codex of Power, when you get this legendary aspect, you just put it in. It's a 1 of 1, and it's 40% more crit damage, and you can apply it on the next item. You don't need the range. You don't need this range. It's pointless. Your ranges should be here and here. This implicit and here, these are your ranges. This should be a flat benefit. Whatever it is, it should just exist. And then you should have your ranges be here, and these should be in the Codex of Power, and these should be what you're trying to upgrade in the Codex of Power. Because this will take 5 times as long to max than this. Which means people will play the game 5 times longer trying to max all of these out than just this. Player retention, especially for Diablo, should be the key priority. If you're a shareholder for Blizzard or Microsoft now, you should care that these are what's in the Codex, and this is a flat benefit, because this is 5 times the player retention. And the longer a player plays your game, and the cooler cosmetic crap you put into your game, or the battle passes that you put in your game, the more likely that player spending time in your game will spend money on your game. It's really that simple. And this UI still looks terrible.
Upgrades for Masterworking, and the damage stat on here has been upgraded twice.
And this
That's
doesn't
why
need
it's
to
in
be here.
yellow. When we got up to Masterworking 12.
So one thing I want to highlight here is that, you know, the total depth of what an item can do and the complexity, you know, you can still make an item do a lot of different things, but on that before side, you know, when you're looking for items that are dropping, that's all that you're going to parse through over there. It's just like 3 affixes. Did I get the ones I want? And you can just do that very quickly and parse through a lot of items that way. But you're going to be slowly, you know,
Parsing through items? Like a loot filter?
Well, what am I going to do with all of these new items?
Before we even bridge to me, okay, this is a really good bridge. So 2 things I want to call out. One, Masterworking works on unique items.
Correct.
Yes.
So you know some of those really, really cool affixes that can appear on unique items. Not the power of the unique item, but a lot of like the really specific unique affixes. Those all benefit from the Masterworking process as well, which are really significant, right? So I think that there's something really, really fun there. Also, you can make sure that like when some of these unique items are dropping, they also can have greater affixes attached to them. So those same unique affixes that we're talking about, like that is huge. Like now, like.
So, okay, I'm going to bring up my previous point to this point to give you an example of the difference, okay? Let's say 3 players, let's say even more than that. Let's say 5 players get a Shaco, right? And all 5 players are like, okay, I got a Shaco. I'm going to go masterwork my Shaco or Shaco or however you want to say it, right? I'm going to go take it. I'm going to go masterwork it. In the current system that he just described with the reset reroll, all 5 of those players will end up with the same exact item, which is the triple plus all stats in your skill tree part of the Shaco. Because all of them will reroll until they have all of the benefits of having more passive points for their skill tree for all skills. If you remove the reroll, all 5 of those players should theoretically, by chance, end up with completely different items. And one of the 5 may hit the triple on the plus skills part of the Shaco. But the other 4, by theoretical probability, will not. So they'll have completely different items depending on the spread that the 4, 8, and the 12th roll hits. But the guy with the one who got the Shaco with the perfect triple, that dude has one of the rarest items in the game, right? Like he can then go show it off on Reddit and be like, this is, they do in Last Epoch, this is the unethical version of the Shaco, where the other 4 people have to go back and find another Shaco, right? But if you use their current system, all 5 of them end up with the same item, and there's no coolness to that. There's no wow factor to it. They got to remove the reroll and the reset. It's terrible.
So if you choose to, if you've got like a 1 greater affix item, you can enchant that greater affix to something else, but it won't change to another greater, and you can't change anything into a greater. It's all about killing monsters, finding that moment that is really exciting when the item drops, seeing if that works for you. So I just wanted to clarify that.
When you keep that moment, you get rid of the reset reroll on masterworking.
Focusing on the drop, the moment of
drop is the
excitement.
moment of
You
excitement
should be
that we're going
focusing
for.
on the drop.
Right. And
Get
then
rid
one
of the
thing I
reset
want to call
reroll.
as well that we take us away.
Probably going to
Adam.
skip
All
the
right,
previous
so
ones because
are we
they're
ready
not
to
as
go?
impactful.
Yeah. Okay. Possibly
So new unique,
this time.
and then your skills unleash a divine barrage dealing. So basically, you build shield, and then every attack you do does more damage.
This is
Okay, the only big thing, I'll just speed this stuff. So they're changing things to have more skill tags, so they work with more affixes. Frozen Orb is, they're trying to make it work and make it something people actually want to play. Good luck. The only thing that really matters here is Necromancer minions inherit player stats, and that applies to Druid companions. So anything that's a minion or a companion now scales with player stats. This means that minion builds are going to be absolutely broken in Season 4. So if you want to play the most powerful build in the game, it's 1000% going to be minions and companions, and it won't even be close. It's not even remotely close. This change is absurd, and it's it's needed to an extent so that minions don't die. But it's going to be absurd. The reason, okay, so I'll explain. The reason it's absurd is because minions basically become duplicates of you, and that basically means necromancers are going to basically be 14 necromancers or 16 necromancers versus the one barbarian that's walking around by himself, right? So you can literally have 14 of yourself in your damage thresholds walking around, which is absurd. Same with druids. Druids could have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of themselves, I think, if I'm doing head count off the top of my head right. And potentially, because I don't know if plus wolves is a prefix, that could possibly mean masterwork where you could have more companions. Don't quote me on that. But essentially, this just means that there's more of you walking around than rogues, barbarians, and sorceresses and such. The way that I would have approached this is honestly just make minions and companions unable to die. That's it. Just remove that part of the gameplay loop. Control their power levels without needing this component, and just make them so they don't die. Like if I'm a necromancer, I have a bunch of skeletons. That's the class fantasy. But make me still have to invest in those like the minions and the companions. So if I want my wolves to be stronger, I need to invest in minion damage. I need to invest in minion critical strike damage. And that sacrifice on my gear means that I, the necromancer, will do less damage. So if I want my minions to do more damage, I have to invest into that at the cost of me doing more damage. Or if I just want my minions to be these unkillable meat shields, but they don't do any damage, they're just there to kind of protect me, then I can become kind of a glass cannon and just use them as fodder, but they can't themselves die. They're always going to be my shield. They're just not really going to do any damage. They're just something there to shield me while I do damage. Same with druid wolves, right? I could invest in the wolves doing damage, or I could invest in me doing damage, but my wolves can be a delivery method for poisoning an enemy so that my poison multiplicative passives on my gear and on my skill tree do more damage, but my wolves themselves are going to do minuscule actual direct damage to the mob. They're just a supply source for what I want them to do. You didn't need to, this isn't a situation where you went too far. You didn't need to make them inherit all the player stats because now you just made them duplicate players, and that's not good. Like it's very not good. Just make them so they don't die. That they're unkillable, but you still have to invest in them, and then put affixes back in the game that make you need to invest in them. Make there be a companion damage affix and a minion damage affix, a minion critical strike chance affix, a minion critical damage multiplier affix, and the same for companions. A companion, damage, a companion critical strike chance, and a companion critical multi affix. And if you want to improve that on your character, you have to sacrifice those affix slots for your minions. I don't like this change. I honestly think this change is an L, and I think you're going to find that out real fast when this thing just plows season 4. And it won't even, it'll be a laughing joke because it's not even going to be close.
You're gonna make this a thing.
I know I'm talking a lot about Dust Devils. There's cool stuff for all the classes.
earthquakes,
It's just that
it's
I played
desecrated
a lot of
ground.
Dust Devils bar during one season. So yeah.
It's the example I tell our team. It's like always I say earthquakes and dust. Like these things need to be cool.
So this goes back to my concern about there not being damage type specific increases. So if Dust Devils, for instance, was earth damage, but they removed earth damage, and now it's just flat damage, then you just get flat damage and everything just does more damage. There's no real thought to the itemization. It's just like, oh, I'm going to get 25% damage, and that's going to apply to literally everything I do. Versus like, hey, I want to make a Dust Devil build, so I need to invest in earth damage so that my Dust Devils do more damage, right? Because they're an earth damage type. And flat damage should be rare, but earth damage could roll at a higher affix range. So then I could be like, hey, I'm going to go invest and get a lot of earth damage so that my Dust Devils do it. And I sacrifice pure flat damage at a lower roll because I'm not really going to be meleeing. I'm just going to be summoning a bunch of Dust Devils. That makes it a Dust Devil build. But if I can just get flat damage and my melee attacks are really strong and the Dust Devils are really strong, it's not really a Dust Devil build. I'm just doing this extra hit thing because I can, not because I want to. It's just because I can. That makes it less of a build and makes it less interesting. So I don't really love that. And then, of course, we'll go back, we'll look at this real quick, but I've said it a couple times. This doesn't need to be a range. Just make Dust Devils do a flat set of damage. Make it say, like, Dust Devils do 1,000 damage. And then have that scale with, again, whatever multipliers that would affect Dust Devil, dependent on what type of damage type Dust Devil is. You don't need it to be a range. Just make it a flat number.
You got that legendary.
So
like,
this
level
is them
25.
explaining that
The
it's going to
damage that it
scale
did
off your
was
weapon.
just a number, and
but
that number didn't really go up with you or
that
scale
doesn't do
with
anything.
you in a meaningful way. Now, under the hood,
it needs to matter that lightning damage is still a factor in this description. So it says, dancing bolts do lightning damage, but we've lost in here this component, lightning critical strike damage or lightning specific damage. That's not on Tuesday, right? Like the on Tuesday thing is, this lucky hit chance on a 10% proc on a poisoned enemy, you're going to get this bonus effect. But investing in damage type specific damage, which you don't see on this right hand side, this new side, is an L, because that is what's going to make this specific aspect stronger. Just having it scale on weapon damage means that lightning damage here is a non-factor. It also means that everything in the game, regardless, that this just becomes adjective fluff, right? Like you're just describing something for thematic purposes at this point rather than a gameplay purpose. So I hope they didn't get rid of this type of affix because you need it to make this type of aspect work. Without it, this aspect doesn't work. And I fear, because nowhere in this presentation have I seen this translate to here, that they went too far in dumbing down their system. And it's going to hurt aspects like this. This is the biggest point in the whole presentation. They talk about opening up the design philosophy of items and they immediately shoot themselves in the foot. I don't know how they managed to do this. They're going to talk about Azure Wrath being now a global item for anyone who can use swords, which means that barbarians can use it. And instead of it doing specific things, not barbarians could use it, sorceresses can use it. Anybody can use it that can use a sword, right? Like anybody else who can use sword, rogues can use it, and whatever. Where it used to be barbarian only, now other classes can use this item. And essentially it says instead of, core skills, it's saying any skill has the chance to do it. And then again, this should be a flat number. It should not be a range. But now you have this thing where it's like, hey, anybody can use this unique item, right? Like you can get it and then you can make some cool build because it applies to all skills. So you could run a marksman bow using class that freezes enemies, or you could use a barbarian Hoda build that freezes enemies, right? Completely different things, which is exactly how items should work. And then we immediately go over to this next one, and it's like, hey, these gloves are rogue specific and they only work for rogues and they only function for rogues. And the only thing that we added here was that it does it twice when you enter and you break stealth. That's it. It's like, no, what?
I talked about one of our goals here. Make things more generally useful, less restrictions. We can zoom in here. I have two examples.
How do you do something right and then do something immediately wrong?
So two things going on here. First, you can see before it was that your core skills have a chance to freeze enemies and deal a bunch of damage to them. On the right, we've removed the core skill requirement, and now any of your skills can have a chance to freeze enemies. So this means you can use it on, like charge and other similar things like that, where maybe you want to make a build
it's like
around
you
something
think
that's
they're
not a core
finally
skill to proc
getting
this,
it.
you totally can,
You think
or
they're
it's just gonna proc more often,
finally
you just play normally.
understanding.
Second thing you'll notice is on the left it says barbarian only. We just removed that restriction.
Yes.
So now any class that can use a sword can use Azure Wrath. Again, we're just trying to look for places where there was restrictions, and when we can, we're just removing them.
Great. Every
Next
item.
one is Opportunist. This one I'm really excited about on the Rogue. I think I'm going to play a Rogue this season. So on the left is the old version, where...
And then immediately we talk about a rogue only item. Jesus. Dude, I can't with this dev team. I'm begging you guys, please. Hardcore is going to be hardcore, finally. For those who didn't know, hardcore was a joke in Diablo 4 because you can't actually die in hardcore. And playing deathless softcore was actually the real hardcore, because if you died in softcore, then you would be counted as non-deathless. Whereas hardcore, you had like 15 cheat deaths, and to die in hardcore was damn near impossible. So it wasn't hardcore. It was actually more softcore than softcore was. They're fixing that. They're getting rid of all the cheat death and death evasion nonsense, so that you can actually die in hardcore.
All right, last but not least, we've got hardcore.
Great.
Has not.
I called him Charlie. Charles. Sorry.
So, specific items.
Sure, thanks. So a couple things I want to talk about first. We're going to talk about some new content stuff in just a minute, but there are some other things that are also changing at the same time. You'll see on the PTR, we've made adjustments to world tiers, and that we've changed the XP modifier that you get for opting into certain world tiers. So, so the reason why we're doing this, we want to get players to endgame a little bit faster. So we've made an adjustment where World Tier 2 now goes, instead of giving you 20% bonus XP, it gives you 50% bonus XP. World Tier 3 now gives you 150% bonus XP as opposed to the 100% you got before. And then World Tier 4 gives you 250% bonus XP instead of the 200% that you got before. So again, we want to get players into...
We want absolutely no one to go through the leveling process. We want you all playing nothing but the end game. Okay, cool. Get rid of player levels. You don't need this weird experience thing to level 1 to 100. Just get rid of player levels. From the start of the game, just have people play the game. Say, hey, you want to go do Helltides? Go do Helltides. You want to go do dungeons? Go do dungeons. You want to go do Tree of Whispers? Go do Tree of Whispers. You want to do the pit? Go do the pit. You want to play the game how you want to play it from level 1. Not even level 1. Play the game how you want to play it from the start of the game. No player levels. Just go find gear and get stronger. And then when you feel strong enough from the gear that you got in World Tier 1, go fight the World Tier 1 boss to go into World Tier 2. Then try to get enough gear upgrades and ranges and crafting to go fight the World Tier 2 boss to get into World Tier 3. Once you're in World Tier 3, guess what? You get to do it all over again because now you get sacred items. Then you potentially, again, you could get an ancient sacred item if they fix their silly UI UX thing with the new greater affixes and just call them ancients because that's what they are. You can get ancient sacred items until you get to the point that you feel like you've crafted or gotten good enough drops to do the World Tier 3 boss to get into World Tier 4. And then once you're in World Tier 4, you just get gear and craft gear and see how far you can go in all the in-game content. But you don't need any of this experience stuff. In a weird way, they can get rid of item power. It's pointless. They can get rid of player levels. They're pointless. They're literally telling us right now they want to get rid of it by just saying, hey, we just want to get you to level 100. Just remove them. You don't need them. And get rid of Paragon boards. You no longer need that either. Get rid of Paragon, player levels, and item power level. All three are trash and they don't have any place in Diablo anymore. You're literally telling us in this right now it's not necessary and you don't want it in the game. Remove it.
Into the space where they're getting a chance
really
to
that
play
simple.
with these new items. They're getting a chance to see some of the new content we're going to be talking about in just a minute, and experience more of the end game and have a little less emphasis on the level up process being like a lot longer as it is today.
We don't want you to level. Great. We don't want to level.
So now there's going to be like it's going to
So
be
essentially what happens
here
here
is more invasions and ambushes
demons
start to occur
basically
at this time,
spawn on top of you.
It's going to have a
When
kind
you
of
hit
cap-off event towards
the
the end.
meter
We'll talk
up
about
here
as
is
it arrives. But you can
threshold.
see
When
right
you hit the
now,
meter up here is
threat
threshold,
is draining while this event is occurring.
you get spawned
kind of
on by a
reach
bunch
that
of
maximum
mobs.
threshold. You know the
it
minions of hell are
lasts,
coming for
like,
you. You are
I don't
you're
know,
going to be kind of
60
fighting pretty hard for
seconds
this stuff.
maybe.
But it's a great way to get like access to a lot of elites. Once this bar is drained once again, you can start
And
building
then
it up
at the
by,
very
again,
end of the
going out,
bar, it's
doing
going to
more things inside
spawn
the Helltide
one of
experience as
the
time goes on.
exiled
Beginning of
rogue.
This Hellborn here.
Yeah.
This is,
So yes, and now one of the Hellborn has managed to appear. Hellborn are they're very much a similar creature to some of the Bloodseekers that we've seen in the past. These are adventurers who have fallen to the
Yeah, so it's just like a version of a player build. I'm just gonna be straight up. This is trash. This is a joke. So, and I say that because of a couple things. One, the gameplay is exactly like current Helltides. You're literally running pack to pack to pack to pack. There's no density increases. There's no difference. There's no change here. The only difference is at the end of this bar, more monsters spawn on you. But as you saw there, if you've already cleared the area, you're just clearing it like another solo pack of 5 monsters or 5 to 10 monsters, as if you had moved on to another pack of monsters within the Helltide. There's nothing interesting about anything that they just showed. Literally nothing. This whole build up this thing for this epic moment in this Helltide was to spawn something that was an afterthought thing that happened in season 2. So it's like, oh, hey, remember that thing from season 2 that would just happen randomly when you're in a dungeon or when you're in a blood tide or whatever it was in season 2? That's the pinnacle thing we've added to Helltides to make them interesting. You added an afterthought thing from blood tides, and that's supposed to make Helltides interesting in the end game? I'm baffled. I don't understand this. Nothing about this looked new or emerging or innovative or cool or a wow factor. It just looked like this dude was running a Helltide, as is currently today as it sits. It's bad. It's just bad.
The depravities of hell are now serving their infernal masters. They have great drops, like they'll drop like legendary equipment, and they will.
What should happen is every second that you're in a Helltide, you should have mobs spawning on top of you. They're talking about more density. The thing that happens when this bar is full should just be happening all the time. You walk into a Helltide, you should be non-stop assaulted by demons. They should be spawning on you in droves. 10 to 20 at a time, constantly spawning. The moment you walk into the Helltide, you should be in constant fear of fighting something, not the current system. The effect that happened when this bar was full should be happening all the time. It's just the standard way Helltide should work. So I'm not going to trash on something and not give it like a critique feedback on like what it should be. That's my critique feedback. If I walk into a Helltide, I should have walked into one of the most dense parts of the game where I am just nonstop fighting monsters. You want a great example of this? It's as if I walked in to a breach in Path of Exile. If I open a breach, I get non-stop assaulted for as long as I stay in that breach. Helltide's just a big breach. And it should just be monsters coming from all over the screen. Just spawning in from the north, south, east, west, southwest, southeast, northeast, northwest. Just constantly coming in and fighting my character until the Helltide is over or until I can't do it enough. And me trying to move and survive inside that Helltide. Treat it like a breach in Path of Exile. Because what you just showed here, there's no difference than what it is today, and it's boring today.
Yeah.
So we so another thing that we're doing as part of this is that we are adding a new boss. To the game. We're adding Andariel. So you can now fight Andariel. She is summonable by defeating the beast in ice and Lord
Rehashing
Zir.
existing
And
content,
she's got the same
which
drop
is
table as Duriel.
fine.
So we want to make sure that
It doesn't
players
move
have
the story forward. It's not a new boss that moves the story forward. The story has been stale for a year. They've been in panic mode trying to get the game to be in a playable state. That they've made no advancements in the story. We don't know what the main girl character is up to. We don't know what Mephisto's up to. We don't know where the hell Diablo is in the Diablo game. But we're going to bring back Andariel as a boss. And it's not going to move the story at all. It's not going to advance anything. And in truth, this is the worst gameplay I've ever seen.
She's back.
Like, tell me if this makes you interested in this boss fight. She literally runs over, she swipes at you, she misses. She runs over, she swipes at you, she misses. She runs over, she swipes at you. Oh, she does this thing that's easy to avoid. She swipes at you, she misses. She jumps over, she does a little thing that's easy to avoid. She swipes at you, she misses. She swipes at you, she misses. She swipes at you, and then they were like, get this off the screen. If you're rushing to get that off the screen and that's your pinnacle boss for this season, holy shit. Holy shit. Help. Send help to the Diablo 4 dev team.
We're on a timer, people. Okay, I got things to talk about still. Any of them. So of like all the ones that you can summon, the first time you kill one of them, you're going to get a resplendent spark for you to use in the future. Now, and that is not all that we're doing.
That must be something from a season I haven't played. I don't know what a resplendent spark is. Cool, I guess, as a non-current player.
Obviously, I mentioned the pit. So if we could just go ahead and, well, I guess we can talk about it. I can speak to it actually. Yeah. So we've been getting a lot of feedback from like our experience with the Abattoir of Zir. You know, so towards the end of season 2, we had this like really difficult like dungeon dive. We were going against again forces of Lord Zir inside this experience and fighting.
I've never heard anybody call anything in this game difficult.
Bloodseekers and kind of racing the clock. And that was a pretty fun experience. We got a lot of really good information and feedback about how that really played out. We made a number of adjustments in the form of this new content type that we're calling the Artificer's Pit. And what it effectively is a way for players to go and they're like once players have managed to complete a tier 45 nightmare dungeon, which is filled with like.
I'm not going to subject you guys to the 5-minute definition of what a greater rift is in Diablo 3. It's a greater rift in Diablo 3. They just don't want to call it a greater rift. So essentially, for people who haven't played Diablo 3, You're on a timer. I think Greater Rifts were 15 minutes or 14 minutes in Diablo 3. This is a 10-minute timer. You're going to run through. If you die, you lose time on the timer. If you're in hardcore and you die, you're dead. But in softcore, you'll lose 30 seconds on the timer, and then you'll lose whatever the bonus material thing that you were going to get is. If you get to the end of the dungeon before the red bar gets there first, then you get to fight the boss. If you beat the boss before the timer is up, you get rewards. The thing to note here is it's exactly like a Diablo 3 Greater Rift in the fact that monsters don't drop loot. They're still not learning. Monsters should drop loot. All of them. Every monster you kill should have a chance at dropping loot. So if I'm going through this pit thing, I should not need to wait till the boss to potentially get loot because I'm doing 10 minutes of killing monsters that is providing me nothing in return. Have these monsters also have the potential to drop gear and then have the boss drop more gear. It's called fun. That's what people want to, they want to play your game for fun.
How they choose to engage with content. They're deciding, okay,
so you see here, like they'll go through this entire dungeon,
like maintaining
and no gear drops off these monsters because it's exactly like a
fun
D3 Greater Rift.
That we think works really to be an somewhat more reasonable place.
And they're just forgetting what fun is supposed
tier,
to be.
Like it goes through 100, so you can be
So
fighting.
you'll see he
level 200
goes and he's
monsters,
going to
level
get to the end of the
250
dungeon.
monsters as you
One of
go
the
deeper
best
into
moments in
the
this entire
So I
campfire
finished
presentation
good amount here,
is they
though.
cut
So you managed to do
at the dungeon door because they don't know, since it's live, if it's going to be Tomb Lord, and they don't want the memes. So they cut here to make sure it's not Tomb Lord, and then when they know it's not Tomb Lord, they cut back.
Okay, let's not get too excited. All right, so yeah.
So they cut because they don't know.
So now he's gonna go and he's gonna
They're waiting to verify it's not Tomb Lord.
fight the boss in just a moment. Now the second
And it cuts back because they realized it's not Tomb Lord. They were so afraid that this is going to be Tomb Lord that they were prepped to cut so that people didn't meme that this was Tomb Lord. But there is definitely a chance that this was Tomb Lord just by that cut.
thing that's different about the pit that
It's
that
too great. It's too good.
Start to see it a little bit.
Yeah.
There's different from what we've done in AOZ in the
And if you don't know, this is a standard boss from Dungeons.
past. Is that occasionally during a
There's
pit run,
nothing
you're
new
gonna
here.
be
This isn't like a
confronted
new
by
boss
another
or a
major
new
boss of the
anything.
building,
This is
that
a
you've seen,
standard
you'll
boss.
see their echo occasionally appear just for a moment to perform
But the
a
Tomb
big
Lord
attack,
fear is
big
so
sweeping attack,
good.
or that
It's
you're
so
gonna have to, like,
good.
avoid or deal with the pit.
So anyway, you kill it. It's just like a
It's kinda
Greater
like
Rift.
attack
You
and
kill the
then
boss.
attack in the
All your
middle.
loot's at the
Shade of
very
Wolf
end,
can
just
be
like a
your
Greater
boss.
Rift.
Shade of Wolf can also
See a couple of them as well in combination.
They,
So, okay,
they
so here
brought D3's endgame into D4. Now I'm going to tell you something. This is a very hot take, okay? This is the hot take at 2 hours into this whole thing. This is a good thing. This is 100% a good thing. People are going to meme on this. People are going to talk down about this. People are going to say, you know, oh, this is boring, blah, 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 blah. No. They needed this because they had absolutely no endgame systems. No functional endgame systems. They needed something. Let them cook now, because now at least we know how this system works from Diablo 3 and that it can actually function as an endgame system. And maybe they can figure out how to improve upon it to make it better in Diablo 4. I don't have hope on that. But at least it's something. So it's an infinitely scaling thing that people can do. Well, at least I hope it's infinitely scaling. Diablo 3 had a cap, I think, at 150. I don't know if it has a cap in here. My assumption is it does, because I'm under the full belief that Diablo 4 is sitting on top of the D3 engine. I think they're exactly the same game, just with different shaders. That's me. That's a me subjective opinion. But I do believe that Diablo 4 is sitting on the D3 engine. No questions asked. I think that's why it's so easy for them to implement D3 things. So if I had to guess, there's a limiting of like 150 levels on this, the same way Nightmare Dungeons are limited in the same kind of way. But if it's not, and it's infinitely scaling, and this thing could go up to like floor 1000 and just keep scaling monsters up for how much, you can build your gear and stuff, great. it's something. So while people will meme on this being greater ifs and it not being a great thing, it's at least something to do.
Here, Ruben killed the boss, got a number of different.
And if they make the manuals consumable and not account bound, it's something you'll have to do. Which, love it or hate, I mean, it's the core part of playing maps or anything in any other game, which is it's something you go into this instanced world and you kill a bunch of monsters and you get loot. That is literally what maps are. It's literally what echoes are in Last Epoch. It's the same thing, just branded a different way, which is fine.
Different drops. There's a bug in
I'm not gonna hate Diablo for at least trying to get something that has infinite replayability into their game.
this version that we're looking at right now. You guys are going to see that there's a bunch of obdusite that pops here at the end. So these are available as you go deeper and deeper into the pit experience. I think obdusite right now is like tiers 1 to 20. You know, you'll be getting like amounts of obdusite. As you go from like 21 to 40, you get amounts of ingolith, and as you go to neath iron and beyond, as you go into like like 40 and beyond, you're starting seeing more and more neath iron. And these things can also be like condensed down to lower level materials if you need them for resetting a masterwork item and starting at a lower level.
No, remove.
So you don't have to go back to the low level.
No,
you can
no,
stay
no.
at the high end.
You can
and
stay at a high
just
level as you
trim
go.
it, yeah.
But to be clear, if you want to get to that rank 12 masterworking, they're really the best possible items, you do need to be pushing deeper levels of the pit. You
Yeah,
can't
for
just continually farm level 1. You want to push to that efficiency bet that you said. Yeah. Push yourself to your limit to get the most materials per hour, and just really fight that hard content to get the best items.
That's correct. So yeah, if you want to go through that process and like really get those the best items available for your build, you're going to want to go through the masterworking process, maybe even probably more than once, almost certainly more than once, right? To get the absolute very, very best items. So we think the pit's gonna be it's a really fun experience. It is it's very extendable, so it goes pretty deep for players. And again, as you're going, you're getting these Stygian stones as you play. Like as you get deeper into the experience.
The other thing of notation here is I think these greater rifts are gonna make nightmare dungeons kind of obsolete, because you don't have modifiers on this new system. This pit system doesn't have modifiers, where nightmare dungeons have modifiers, which are dangerous, especially in hardcore. So I don't think anybody's going to go into nightmare dungeons when they can just do this instead for gear. So I think they're going to potentially need to completely rework and rethink the purpose of nightmare dungeons or dungeons in general, because their layouts are generally atrocious. The backtracking's generally atrocious. The modifiers add a bunch of danger to the game that doesn't need to be there. The efficiency to a reward ratio will now be way, way less than this greater rift. As he was just talking about, you can find an efficiency point within the greater rifts, and you can just speed farm gear at like can I run this within 3 minutes or less, or 2 minutes or less, where you can't do that with nightmare dungeons unless you know the dungeon layout like the back of your hand, etc., etc. So yeah, I think nightmare dungeons are going to need a complete rework. And I think that should come in hand with the Paragon tree getting deleted and the glyph system being absorbed into the character sheet.
You're going to get those. You're going to get like a level 200 tormented version of Barsham, and so on and so forth. All of
this is cool. They're making harder bosses, but if they don't have new mechanics, then they're just boring. They essentially, all that really translates to is more health. But considering, because of other issues with the game, health for bosses is irrelevant when you hit for trillions of damage. This just means it's going to get deleted just as fast as anything else in the game.
Bosses have a higher chance to drop uber unique item as well. So now there's even more reason.
For people who don't understand what I mean by that, I'll just cover this really quickly. They don't address in this itemization change the biggest problem with Diablo 4, and it was the biggest problem in Diablo 3, which is base item values are way, way too high on everything. Armor's way, way too high, but most importantly, the damage ranges on weapons is literally 20x any other ARPG, and they don't seem to understand why that's a problem. They haven't understood it for over a decade. Why people tell them that that's a problem is when you have a damage number on your base that's 3,000 in size, and then you start multiplying that number, you're going to get billions and trillions once you do all the snapshotting and multiplying of the tables. Whereas if you look at like Last Epoch or Path of Exile, the very end game gear in both of those games has like plus 200 to plus 500 as its base range, which is quite literally 10 to 20x in some circumstances. I mean, somewhere in that range, less than Diablo IV, which means that the end result of your numbers are much more manageable. You're not hitting for 100 million in Last Epoch. You're hitting for, maybe a couple million at best with like super optimal gear. Whereas in Path of Exile has its extremes, but its more marginal areas is generally going to be within that 1 to 6 million DPS range. Where, again, Diablo IV, because it has such a high base weapon value that gets multiplied, you're hitting for trillions and quadrillions of damage, and every ounce of the gaming content that they put out is trivial because they don't understand that the base is messed, is a mess and a fundamental problem. So a level 200 boss is irrelevant because it could have 150 billion health. At level 200, it's still going to get instantly deleted by some build.
Some of these creatures on farm.
So the last thing they point out is they didn't talk about any of the seasonal theme stuff in season 4. They're going to address that in a different campfire thing next week, I think is the plan, or the week after, whenever the PTR happens. So that's fine. It needs its own thing. So I'm going to cut it off here. This was 2 hours and 45 minutes of a review. I'm going to edit this down for YouTube, but it's still probably going to be really long. But the general gist is it's not good enough. You can't see it here. Let me refresh.
Next week, because the only reason why is that they're...
Oh, you can here. It's not good. It's still running a really high dislike ratio. And I think that's just generally because it's not good enough. It's good. It's not great. And a lot of people are selling it as great and the savior of this game. But personally, they need to go so much farther. And this is the same problem with the Gauntlet. They just didn't go far enough. So there's still so much, again, I'll just run through it. They need number one priority for me, they need to fix the base damages on weapons. It needs to be at the highest level, 500 as the max item power on an item for a damage range. Not 3,500, not 4,500, not 5,000. 500 is the absolute best god-rolled godfather, and everything else is somewhere between 50 and 400 as the standard range for weapon bases. And then you have your multipliers from crafting and the gear that affect that base. That's number one. Number two, player levels don't need to exist. You can just get rid of them. You clearly don't want them in the game. You think that leveling is a burden to people getting to the end game and actually enjoying the game. So just remove player levels and let people play the game how they want to play it from the start. Number three, remove Paragon boards. They don't need to exist. They're overly complex. They're not fun. They don't target the audience that Diablo IV is currently targeting. They don't add value. And the new manual system basically can take those legendary powers from the Paragon boards and put them into a meaningful crafting on the item itself so that you don't need the Paragon boards to exist anymore. And then transplant the glyph system into the old vampiric power system, put it back on the character sheet and put the glyphs in that system. And then have it able to level the glyphs in that system and then just apply 5 glyphs of your choice onto your character that you choose that you level. And just completely remove Paragon boards. They're literally a burden to the game that doesn't need to exist anymore. Remove item power. It's pointless. It has absolutely no purpose now that you have controlled affix ranges in World Tier 1, World Tier 2, World Tier 3, World Tier 4. If you're going to control the affix ranges, you don't need item power. It's a silly number that has absolutely no purpose in the game anymore. Remove gathering herbs. Just have herbs and all that stuff drop from monsters that you kill. There's no point in picking flowers in a Diablo game. This isn't Stardew Valley. Let's be serious and let's get back to the point of the actual game. Fix the UI UX on items. It still looks god awful. It's still a wall of text, especially with the tempered items now in 5 affix slots. It's even worse. And then you have paragraph long implicits for the aspect, or not implicits, the aspects are huge paragraphs. They need to become flat damage modifiers, no ranges on aspects. Make the Codex of Power for aspects 1 of 1 for everything. Just go find them, implant them into the Codex, have them at 1, and then take the affix system and put that into the Codex of Power and have all of those have ranges that you can roll against. I went deeper into that in this video. Rework Nightmare Dungeons after the glyph change, because there's no point in running Nightmare Dungeons when Greater Rifts exist. They're not efficient, they have modifiers, they're more dangerous, and they're more pointless. Whereas Greater Rifts will be far more efficient as they were in Diablo 3, and you can just speed run them for the best gear, and you can control the time output. The new Helltide system looks like absolute trash and doesn't add any value. I went over how I would change it in the video, and the Endariel fight was so bad that Joe P literally asked him to stop showing it. That needs to be addressed because it looked extremely boring and had absolutely no complexity to it, and nothing about it looked interesting. So Endariel looks bad, the Helltide system looks bad, Greater Rifts are back. That's really the highlight of the new endgame systems. The Greater Rifts are not a bad thing. Don't let anybody tell you that they're a bad thing. It's at least something, and Diablo 4 needs all the help it can get. So that's my long video. This is a hypercritical thing. I'll edit this down the best I can, and then I'll toss it on YouTube after. Have a good night, guys.